It is such a pleasure for me today to be speaking with someone that I admire a lot and someone who just makes me happy. I met Evanna Lynch in 2018 when she came here to interview me for her Chickpeeps podcast. And she walked in the room and it was just like spring had come. She just had this beautiful lightness and this lovely energy. And I'm just crazy about her. I'm very fortunate to have a daughter and a stepdaughter, but I also feel like I have a few honorary daughters, and I feel that way about Ivana. So it's so
Oh,
lovely to have
that's
you with
so
us.
sweet. Well,
So
Victoria, I always say that you're my vegan fairy godmother because you remind me a lot of my own mom, but she doesn't have the same connection with animals. And I remember when I first found your podcast, I just felt so like I hadn't encountered people like that who talked about animals like that. I'd only seen the very sort of aggressive side of activism, and you taught me a new way. So I'm just so honored by what you said, and I'm so pleased to be here. It's like it's making me very emotional, witnessing everyone speak so much about their love of animals and about kindness. And as someone from a religious background, it's very alien, but it's also very healing to have these two worlds connected. So anyway,
that's
I'll let you
exactly,
talk.
well, that's our goal. That's why we're doing this. So let's talk about animals and you. And I think everybody could agree that almost all children really love animals. They wouldn't make all the storybooks about them if we didn't. And yet, over time, most people learn to maybe unlove them or love them conditionally, and you didn't. So tell us about where you come from and how you became the person that you are.
Yeah, well, I was lucky to grow up around animals, to always have that connection nurtured. Lived in the countryside, and like a lot of people do with animals, they find that there was a connection I didn't have with other people. It transcended language, and there was this stillness and this acceptance of each other that you didn't get from people, or maybe not right away. And yeah, I guess we were just always taught to respect them and protect them. And I was lucky. My parents were not vegetarian or vegan at all, but they didn't try and hide it either. When I started to ask those questions, they kind of got a bit uncomfortable, a bit awkward, but they didn't explain it as these are lesser beings, they don't deserve life. They kind of went, well, it's just the way it is, and that's what we do. And um, but I do think a lot of my connection with animals comes from the stories I grew up with. Um, we were always watching films and stories that encourage compassion to animals, like Charlotte's Web, Babe, Chicken Run, all these stories that were not explicitly animal rights or anything. It was just about these are beings who want to live, and the people who are impeding that right to live, they were the enemies in the stories. And yeah, I think as I got older, I just, it didn't sit right with me that I didn't understand the difference between, this little dog on the couch and the whole quote unquote farm animals, and nobody could explain it. So yeah, I didn't get the answers, and then I started to look for them myself, and luckily started to find other people who were echoing what I was saying, what I was questioning, and they were showing another way of life. So yeah, that's sort of my journey.
It's a lovely journey. Well, let's talk about the little dog on the couch and companion animals in general. So, do you have a cat as well,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yes,
and more recently rabbits.
rabbits.
And I know that that's caused you to do some thinking about companion animals and how that works for vegans. Tell us what you've been ruminating.
Yeah, it's brought up a lot of ethical debate. And we also have fish. My boyfriend rescued these fish, and I feel very uncomfortable with it. So we've built them a pond, but it doesn't feel vegan. It doesn't feel like, I'm thinking we've got this whole entire earth. And what you said in your tenets that you read earlier, that we don't own the earth. I really believe that. And it does make me sad, but there's this other thing of, oh, these are animals who've been raised and bred in captivity. If you just put them in the ocean, who knows if they'll survive, so I am battling with that. And I don't yeah, I think when I first went vegan, I was like, it was very binary to me. It was like, this is right, this is wrong. And the deeper I get into it, the more it's like each new thing you have to navigate and question, and you sort of have to just go inwards and what feels right. What, you will not find the perfect solution, but you'll find a way where it feels right, I suppose. But yeah, I wanted to talk about that with you because I know you've raised a pigeon in a New York apartment, and that must pose challenges. Like, how do you feel about that?
Well, it poses challenges because he's a wild creature. And in the best of all possible worlds, he would not be blind in one eye. He would be able to fly like any other pigeon, and he would be out on the streets of New York City. But he probably would no longer be alive, because one statistic that I learned is that the natural life of a pigeon in captivity, as Thunder is about 20 years. And the average life of a pigeon in New York City is a year and a half, because there are people and cars and dogs and not enough food and not the right kind of food and weather and all these other things. So it's really a trade-off. I know that Thunder doesn't have the three things that seem to make life as a bird what it's supposed to be: a flock, flight, and a mate. And yet we're trying to make up for that, not only with additional longevity, of which he's getting a lot, but just trying to give him a loving environment. And he does seem to think of us as his flock. And I've noticed that since our dog passed away, it seems he's trying to be more communicative than ever. And one of the things that I missed after Forbes went to heaven was having somebody greet me at the door. And now, for the first time, when I come in, Thunder will fly up. He can fly a little bit and flap his wings and make pigeon sounds, which he didn't used to do. I guess he thought, well, somebody's already greeting you at the door. But now he does that. So I think just in this way of seeing, it's not going to be perfect. We just try to do the most good we can. What's it like with the bunnies?
Another challenging situation because, they are both prodigious escape artists and notorious prey. So I want to give them freedom because I want them to have those impulses, to honor those impulses to dig and everything. So again, it's like they're not like cats or dogs. They're more wild. And I just never want to put them in a cage, but there are limits. I live in London. It's an urban city, so yeah, it's about navigating that of like, I'll give you freedom, but I also have to protect you, and you may not like it, but the world is not perfect. And yeah, you have to just sort of find a way. But yeah, I in some ways I'm like, oh, as a vegan, I probably shouldn't have got pets. I shouldn't have taken this on. But I think that's more me trying to be perfect and trying to tick all the right boxes, and actually taking on the messier problems of domesticated animals. We've done this, it's our responsibility. I think that's a good thing to do, to rescue animals. But yeah, it's challenging.
Well, and I agree with you. And I think that being vegan, if you just look in a dictionary, all it says is vegan is someone who doesn't eat animal products. And all these other things I think we have to work through. And there's some people, as you know, who very adamantly believe that companion animals should not be a thing. And I, of course, am thinking, but they're here. And some, certainly the cats and the dogs that have lived with humans for so long, they're part of us, and they just do so well with us. And certainly some of the wildlife who can't be living outside. So I think part of it is standing up to the vegans who think they know how it ought to be for every other vegan. I think you may run into a little more of the hardline vegans in the UK than we do so much over here. What's that like?
No, I don't know if I rent. I mean, it's always those people online who you encounter, but I really believe that your energy, it's that like attracts like. So when you have your boundaries and know I'm going to do my activism a different way, you tend to attract those people. Like that's how I met you. That I'm here on this call, all these open-minded, kind-hearted people. Yeah, that's just not the way I do things now. So it's not
Yeah.
much of a problem.
I want to talk a little bit about you, and you're known, of course, as an actor. And when you played Luna Lovegood and developed a reputation in the world, you were a teenager, but now you're all grown up. And yet, I think that there are thousands of people who still think you are that young girl in the movie, and maybe even the character herself. So, how have you managed to embrace that and yet rise beyond it? I mean, I think that every young person has to separate from the parents, but you also had to separate from Luna Lovegood. How did you do that?
Um, yeah, that's a tricky one because, as you say, a lot of young people, a lot of people will just be discovering those books and movies, and that's personally where they are. I'm currently reading a book that was written in the 70s, and that author is dead. And yet I'm submerged in this world. So when I meet those people, I kind of have to go, that's where you're at. That's amazing that you're immersing yourself in this world, but yeah, that is my past. I don't want to be trapped in that part. So I suppose I as artists, we have to evolve, and we have to honor our artistic integrity more than the commercial stuff. I don't know if you saw that the movie about Elvis, the Baz Luhrmann one, but there was a lot of lessons in that about if you ignore that evolution of your own artistry, it kind of just drains your soul. So yeah, things like that for me. I don't really go to big Harry Potter events as much anymore. I try and pursue other callings, even though that might be the thing that makes people happiest, or it's definitely the thing where there's lots of money, all those things. I have to kind of stand firm and go, that's not good for me, that's not who I am, that keeps me trapped in someone who I'm not anymore. So yeah, it's just about knowing myself and who I am today, I think.
When you wrote your beautiful book, The Opposite of Butterfly Hunting, which, if anybody hasn't read it, oh my gosh, you were in for such a treat. And I actually recommend the Audible book because then you get to hear Evanna telling her own story. And it's the tragedy and the glory of growing up is the subtitle. And you talk about growing up, and you also talk about a struggle with anorexia. And some of that time was when you were making the films. And I remember a part that just really broke my heart was when you were making one of the films, and they told you that if you didn't eat more or gain weight or do something of that nature, that they were going to find somebody else to play this role, which was so, I think, just ordained for you. And I thought about that young girl being able to withstand that and stand up to that and do what was needed and go forward. So where do you think that came from? I guess I'm asking you about soul strength.
Mm-hmm.
What did you find within you, and what do you still find?
So with anything, like, any sort of struggles we have, any disorders or addictions or whatever, I don't believe that recovery for the sake of recovery is possible. I don't think it's a thing. Because, anyone who has those extreme conditions has something that they're sort of devices. Like my disorder was a device to avoid pain, uh, and it was helping me in some way, and it helped me numb these very painful feelings that I didn't want to deal with, didn't know how to deal with as a young person. So the whole thing of like tearing that away, seeing it as a sort of a demonic force, as something to be banished, it didn't work. I kind of needed something that had a very different energy to it to replace it. And for me, that was creativity, and acting was sort of a form of that. That was one iteration of it. But I always think like that was probably a good thing for me to have these, to be challenged at points. Are you going to continue pursuing your disorder, or are you going to pursue this dream? And I think it's lucky, or I think it was meant to be, that the energy of like an eating disorder, which is all about perfectionism, staying safe, just kind of very narrow, limited, perfectionist view on life, is so different to creativity. Creativity is expansive, it's daring, it's not being perfect, it's showing up anyway. And the more I was kind of pushed to pursue that route, the more I was able to let go of the other thing, because you cannot sustain both energies. You cannot be a perfectionist and make art, good art. You have to kind of let that go and surrender. There's so much about creativity which is about free fall. You cannot control it. So I think that's where it came from, rather than any kind of summoning this strength. It was just about choosing creativity.
That is so interesting, because as you know, I had an eating disorder as well. Mine was the other side. I was a binge eater. And I remember seeing a movie when I was a teenager. It was about the playwright Lillian Hellman. And in one scene, she was drinking booze from the bottle, chain smoking, eating a hero sandwich, and typing. And I remember thinking, see, that's why I have to have this addiction, because it fuels my writing, until I learned that it didn't fuel anything except
No.
making me sleepy. But that's so interesting that you say that creativity and addiction can't live in the same space. I've
Yeah,
certainly
I think
found that.
eventually, and then you do try and sustain them both. But for me, it reached a point of like, I'm compromising on one. I can either fully go for sort of self-destruction, or fully go for, I don't know, creativity, and you're always going to be losing out on one of them. Oh, have we
Yeah.
just lost? Oh no, sorry. Yeah, that's how I see
Cool.
it.
So you're doing something now that's very exciting, a new podcast with Dr. Melanie Joy. It's called Just Beings, about this a little bit what we've been talking about, that juxtaposition of inner strength, inner transformation, and social change. So tell
Mhm.
us what we will hear when we tune in.
Yeah, so I think both of us, Melanie and I, we've been having discussions about wanting to create like a space for wellness that includes animals, which is exactly what you're doing here. But it's there are so many podcasts about how to improve yourself, how to make change in society, and we just felt like animals were often left out. Um, However, when you put the V word, the vegan word on it, it's people immediately think, oh, that's a vegan podcast for vegans. And that's what I found with my podcast, The Chickpeas, which I love. It was a very lovely, safe, warm space. But I noticed that, lots of compassionate, interesting people in my life didn't listen to it, or didn't think, oh no, it's not for me. But it is. It's for people who I believe are compassionate, do want to be kind to animals as much as possible, but maybe don't know how, or maybe feel excluded by certain labels. So yeah, it's that, I suppose, just a more inclusive wellness space. And it is also about balancing inner work with social change, because I think I've personally not always got the balance right. I would tend to either have squirreled myself away and not be doing the other work, or I'm really relentlessly pursuing activism. And I really feel like your inner state mirrors your outer world, and you have to find a way to balance them. But it's hard, so we have a podcast about it.
Oh, I think it sounds wonderful. So who has been a guest so far?
We've had Joanne Molinaro, the Korean vegan. She is sensational. Also a storyteller. We've had Lily Cole, who is she was a model. She's an environmental activist. Oh gosh, we had the Happy Pair, a vegan sort of cooking duo. Lovely men, lovely, cheerful, happy people. Yeah, that's a few to
Oh, that sounds
tickle your
great.
taste buds. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to all listen to that. Just beings. Now, we have a question from Caitlin, and actually, the chat is open. If anybody has a question, if you'd like to put it in there, you can either direct that to me or just direct it to everybody, and I should be able to see it. So, Caitlin, whom I don't think is here on the live call, but she's asking a question that is so important, because I think those of us who have been vegan for a long time, when somebody says, well, how do you become vegan? We just say, well, you get up in the morning, you eat vegan, you dress vegan, it's no big deal. But it is a big deal, because it's not doing what society does. And it's a huge change. So I want to read exactly what Caitlin wrote. Hi, Evanna. Incredibly lovely to share this sacred time with you. My question is, how long have you been vegan, and was it a hard challenge to follow that path? I've been trying to go vegan for years now, but it's quite a hard thing for me to stick to, no matter how hard I want it. I was wondering if you had any tips that could help me go down the path I really wish to go down. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Ever so grateful.
Oh, what a lovely question. So nice. Gosh, I mean, I'll just speak from, I suppose, my experience of it, Caitlin. But I think I would be the first to admit it is hard. I know some people don't find it hard, but I really did. Yeah, my relationship with food was complicated, so it wasn't just a matter of giving things up or switching them out. I would say though, whenever there's something in my life that I don't feel like I'm fully committed to, or I waver on it, things like that, I always kind of try and ground the why. And I've done this with many things. There's been other things in my life, like I've had to confront, like maybe there's periods in my life where I have not been as committed to my acting career, and I have to go, well, why is this? Because I think I want it, but do I? And I think you have to go deep and kind of figure out, is it is it somebody saying, oh, this is what you should do, or is it that you have an idea that vegans have the right idea? I think you have to get it like a heart-centered reason. And for me, that was like about reading. The more stories I read about what animals went through, the more it became, this is something I willingly want to do, and I'm happy to do it, and I'm happy to kind of go out of my way to do it. Just off the top of my head, there's like a story I always come back to in your book, Victoria, where you talk about the cow who was reluctant to go into the slaughterhouse. And there's just this phrase that's always stayed with me of how the farmer came back and let it in, and you said that they trust us and we betray them. And it, like, that kind of image and language really gets me like in my heart, in my gut, and that's my why. So whatever anyone else says, it's I know what I'm doing it for. So I would say first, Caitlin, to kind of really ground your why. Forget about what everyone else is saying, but and if it is something you feel like you're not 100% certain on, do some research. Go to those places. Why are you doing it? And then I think the second part of that is to just find ways to make your lifestyle more joyful. Like if it is about certain foods that you're really attached to, just take a little bit of time every week to research how to find alternatives or how to make those things. I think it should be a choice you make willingly, and you need to learn ways to make your lifestyle feel joyful. Those are my tips, but it's a process, and go easy on yourself. Like there are many, many ways to be kind to animals. And if you're not fully there with veganism yet, that doesn't mean you can't show up in other ways, I think.
Beautiful. And Caitlin is with us live. So, hey, Caitlin, I'm glad you were here. We are on the clock and we have 30 seconds left. There is another question about managing veganism while traveling from Sherry. So, if Evanna, if you're going to stay around, or anybody else that would like to answer Sherry's question and give your travel tips, I know that would be appreciated. But to keep us on schedule, I just want to ask one last quick question. What's the best thing in your life today? What is making you get up in the morning?
Oh, my aerial hoop. I got an aerial hoop put up in my garden. I know you're a big aerial fan too. But yeah, that whole thing of just using my body, like we're spiritual beings, but we're in our bodies. So I feel very joyful at the moment about using it and strengthening it and testing it. Yeah, it's such a joy.
It's a wonderful thing to be able to fly in more ways than one. Ivana, bless your heart and your hoop. Thank you so much. Thank you for being
Thank
with
you,
us.
Victoria. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Such an
And
honor to be here. It's a lovely
bless
way to
you.
spend my Sunday evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's quite evening for you in London. So thank you for staying up for us.